Hey, fellow creatives, Jason here. And before this episode starts, I want to take an opportunity to be transparent and let everyone know that this episode was recorded remotely over Zoom. Therefore, I had to rely on Zoom's cloud recording capabilities, and that produced less than perfect audio. So if you start hearing audio irregularities during the episode, it's not you, it's me. I tried my best to clean up the audio as much as I could, and I did not want to re-record the episode, as that may have lost some of the spontaneity of the conversation. Okay, so with that out of the way, enjoy the show. I'm Jason Sylvia, and this is the Creative Capital Show. A show about creative people and how those creative people turn into entrepreneurs by taking their creativity and turning it into a business and facing all the trials and tribulations along the way. We all have access to smartphones with built-in cameras, and those cameras can take stunning images. But a high-end camera loaded with features does not make you a photographer. In this episode, I sit down with photographer Brittanny Taylor to talk about a number of subjects, including skill and talent over fancy equipment, why a prestigious photo shoot may not lead to a prestigious paycheck, how the journey can change the destination, for the better, community over competition, and why you may want to steer clear of calling yourself a quote-unquote professional. Enjoy. I've noticed that your photos have shown up in like Huffington Post and Glamour and Vogue Italia and Complex and the Providence Journal and Vibe and Providence Monthly and Elle. How long did it take for you to build up that reputation, just both locally and with those publications? How long did it take you to do that, and what was that journey like of building up the reputation to get to that level, or to get to the level you're currently at now?
I would say, since I've been a photographer for the past 12 years, I would say it took me probably 3 years into shooting for it to pick up and for other people to really notice. I had my followers on Facebook and Instagram at the time engaging with my posts, but it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I'm going to reach out to her to hire her for a job. So it's actually started when I went to New York is when it really started to pick up here. My reputation started with people really just relating to me and my work. So when certain jobs came up, they asked me to work with them on certain projects. I have to say, I rarely reach out to anyone else for the jobs. It's either people find me on Google or a friend of mine has a project in mind and they want me to photograph it. So I've received jobs from Refinery 29 and Ann Taylor Loft, just Loft now, because they were photographing someone in particular in the area or profiling someone particular in the area, and they needed to find a photographer, and they just clicked on everyone's websites until they found me and they liked my work.
You're saying New York, so were you building up a reputation in Providence, New York at the same time, or did you have friends in New York that were within various industries that helped get you jobs, or is it you were building up reputation in New York because you did a X amount of jobs there? I didn't want to interrupt your train of thought, but it was when you said the New York part was
I could talk about that.
The moment or the thing. If you could elaborate on that a little bit, and back into the answer of how did you build that reputation up?
I was photographing a lot of models in Rhode Island and posting them on my Facebook page, Brittanny Taylor Photography. One day I got a message from a Jewish modest fashion blogger in New York, and she wanted to know if I would come to New York and take her photos. And at the time I did not photograph any fashion bloggers. So I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds fine. So I went there and then I became her photographer. So I would travel to New York twice a month to take her photos while still photographing models in Rhode Island. Then one day I was like, maybe I should reach out to other bloggers in New York. Since I'm already going to New York, I might as well see if there's anyone else there that I can photograph as well. I reached out to one blogger named I Hate Blonde, Rachel Lynch, and she was like, yeah, let's photograph. So as I went to New York to photograph Cher, I also photographed Rachel. And from there, I met other New York fashion bloggers. So that built up my reputation in New York as photographing influencers. So I was mostly photographing models for local modeling agencies in Rhode Island, as well as photographing influencers in New York. Then, since my portfolio was building up with more models and influencers, I started to reach out to New York model agencies to see if I could photograph their new faces. So that gave me even more of a wider portfolio to show what I was capable of. So then more people saw like, oh, well, she's working with these bloggers or she shot these models. She's totally capable of like shooting my campaigns for ASOS, or I ended up in Nylon Japan because Rachel, I Hate Blonde, was going to be featured in one of their editorials. So I ended up photographing that for her. And that was pretty exciting because I never really thought I would end up in Nylon Japan or even any nylon at all. So that was like pretty amazing moment for me.
So you're landing these shoots with publications like Nylon Japan, for example. As you're getting these this work that is, I guess, more prestigious, more well known, that work I would think would command a higher price tag that you would set. If that's the case, how did you gauge that?
Pricing is interesting because you would think after 12 years you would have it down, and I still don't. It is interesting because it does. Every situation is different, even though you may have your set pricing set in stone. You know, like a situation will come up where it's like, okay, maybe I want to charge a little less to really make sure I get this opportunity. Or it's like, you know what, this is a lot more work than I originally thought. I'm going to have to raise the price. There's so many factors involved. And it's interesting when it comes to magazines. I remember years ago watching a Creative Live, I believe it was, with a major fashion photographer that shot so many covers of Vogue. And he had one of his covers up. And he asked the audience, he's like, how much you think I got paid for this? And they're like, thousands of dollars, all this money. And he was like, I got paid no money for this because there's no money in editorial. The money's in advertisements.
That seems to be an ongoing theme, not to cut you off, but it's an ongoing theme that I'm already realizing only X amount of episodes of doing this podcast is everyone I talk to so far, which hasn't been many, but everybody I've talked to so far were musicians, people in theater. There's the whole perception of what people get paid, and then you get into it, and then there's the reality of what people get paid. So I didn't want to interrupt, but I'm just finding it interesting that you're talking about a photographer who did this major piece and everybody thought it was this one price. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, you must have made X amount of money. And then he was like, nope. So it seems to be an ongoing theme for anybody listening to this podcast right now, that what you think people are getting paid, what people are actually getting paid, and maybe more so what they tell you they're getting paid, tend to be very different things.
Yes. Marketing and branding exists for a reason. We want to look like we're doing super well. And I'm really grateful that I've been able to be a photographer for 12 years and work on really amazing shoots and with amazing people. And I've worked with thousands of people at this point, honestly. And it's so awesome that I've had that opportunity. Just me and my camera and Lightroom somehow create all these great opportunities for me. But when it actually comes to the money, it's very hard. It's very hard to sustain a lifestyle just being on a photographer. I really don't think many photographers are just photographers. There's always something else that they're doing as well to supplement their income. Because also depends on the type of photography that you do. There really isn't a lot of money in fashion. And I learned that about halfway through my career, which is why I transitioned over to working with influencers, because they constantly needed new photos. They were working with brands who were paying them X amount of money. So that was more money that they could put into photo shoots. Unlike a 16-year-old girl who just got signed to a modeling agency, she doesn't really have a ton of money. As you might get fantastic photos with her, but at the end of the day, your cell phone bill is not getting paid because you photographed a really pretty model.
Brittanny perfectly illustrates the concept of putting yourself out there in order to grow. Had Brittanny not posted her work online, that first fashion blogger would have never have reached out to do a photo shoot. And if Brittanny never reached out to more bloggers and influencers, then the shoots with Nylon, Vogue, Glamour, Vibe, etc. would have never happened. Putting yourself out there can be scary and can lead to some harsh criticism, but it can also lead to more connections, experiences, and opportunities. This is probably much my ignorance of the industry because you're saying fashion photography, but I would think that wouldn't the brand doing the lookbook shoot or the magazine or the fashion house, wouldn't they be the one paying the bill, or is that not how that works?
So when I shot lookbooks before, the person who's the designer definitely pays for the photographer, can pay for the talent, can pay for styling, can pay for everything. But sometimes when you go to a modeling agency and they have the upper hand here. So when you want to have so many models in your portfolio, they're basically handing you models and maybe you'll get paid a little stipend or something. But especially if you're just starting out, like especially when I was just starting out in New York with models, I was not getting paid for any of those. I have beautiful photos with stunning models, and I was not getting paid for any of those shoots.
So it was a leverage game in that situation. Mm-hmm. And I want to stay on this a little bit too. Mm-hmm. You were saying you were making money from the individual influencer shoots versus like major fashion photography. And then there was that, seminar you went to, the person was like, hey, how much do you think I made off of this? And everybody's like, oh, so much money. And you're like, yeah, the money's not in editorial. The money's in, branding and advertising and whatnot. Could you go into the ones that, just from a professional standpoint exist, and the ones that make money versus like here's the group over here, the types that make money, here are the types that don't make money over here, and here's why?
Yeah, there's definitely a hierarchy to what types of photography can make more money. So let's see, I started off with models, then I moved on to influencers, still within fashion. Then I moved on to more lifestyle influencers, which led me into branding photography. So I would say for me, if you want to photograph people, the places where you can really make money is in branding and marketing and in weddings. Those are two very separate things.
I was just about to say wedding photography. Like, I wonder if that's a mm-hmm. a more cash rich type of photography.
100%. I photograph weddings. I don't tend to tell people that I photograph weddings because it's not that I don't like doing them. I just shoot in a very particular way. I look at the wedding photos on Pinterest and I'm like, that's really nice. My brain does not know how to do that. So the people who are drawn to my photography want my type of photography and not like Pinterest style wedding photography. So the couples that I photograph still are like more my style. But even still, weddings really aren't my jam, but I love doing branding photography. So after working with lifestyle bloggers, I started working with small business owners and entrepreneurs, helping them build their brands through images. And you can make so much more income that way because technically you're a business expense. So I may charge way more for branding and business photography than I would for a fashion shoot with a model.
Keeping on the money part and just to get a little bit more tactical, if you can remember when the last time you raised your fees, your prices, and what were the factors that went into that decision, how you came to that calculation, like, all right, I'm charging X amount for this type of shoot. Now I'm going to charge this new amount for this type of shoot. And this is why I'm charging this amount. Maybe not to the customer, but for you, just for your own business.
My prices change all the time, probably by the day. I look at my calendar, really. The calendar dictates how much I charge. If I have a really busy month filled with other things, but not much time available for a photo shoot, then I probably will, depending on the project, charge a little bit more just to make sure that costs are covered. I try to stay within the same range, and really it depends on what the person wants and needs. Again, I have those set prices, but I always want to ask, what are we doing? What photos do you actually need? Because that's going to determine how much effort I'm putting in, and that can affect the price. If someone is like, I just really need one photo so it can go on this newsletter and be done with it, like, okay, you're not going to get the full branding package here. I think the thing with the pricing and raising rates, it goes all different ways. Just really being like aware of what the job is, what other jobs you have around it. Because currently we're in a pandemic and I'm a photographer to photograph people, it's been very hard to be near people. So a whole section of my photography I haven't been able to do, which is actually boudoir photography. We could talk about that later. I haven't been able to do any of that. So when I have a branding client, I have to think about, okay, I need to supplement my income because I've lost out on a whole section of my business. So instead of just raising prices just for raising prices sake, it's like, what other value can I give the client? So it's not like I just doubled my price on them for no reason and they're not getting anything more. It's like, what extra value can I add and give them so I can still feel comfortable with requesting on a higher rate?
Gotcha. So it's a situation by situation basis and what value you can provide in that situation to that client. And that's good to know too, because I think the idea of pricing and what to charge and how to charge, no matter what creative industry you're in, especially if you're your own entity, I think scares a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So thank you for answering that, because I think it's almost like a moving target for everyone. Are there any other types of photography? I know you just said boudoir. Are there any other types of photography that are out there that you do, or other types that you don't do for whatever reason?
Mm-hmm. Last year, actually since 2020 is a lie, it was 2019, 2 years ago, I started doing more boudoir photography, and I love doing that. And that also can be a great avenue for people to go down when you want to probably make a little bit more money than some other jobs. And I think it's like really fun to do, but that also has extra costs. You probably would want to have a studio for boudoir photography, unless you have a really pretty aesthetically pleasing home to bring people into. And depending on who the person is, some people might feel more comfortable going to a studio for that type of photography than into someone's home. It is quite intimate and vulnerable. So that's something else to think of too, the type of photography you want to get into, like what are the costs for it? For me, being a fashion or branding photographer, it's just me and my camera and the streets. Like I don't photograph in studio, so I don't have extra costs of photographing in a studio and having all this extra equipment. I do have some equipment, but not enough for me to be incurring a lot of costs because of it. Really, all I need is a camera, an SD card, and the outside. That's really all I need, and a laptop to come back to edit the photos. So, depending on what type of photography you're into, think about the extra costs involved. Types of photography that I don't do, I've learned this the hard way this last year, because I took on a job where I was half doing interviews with people and taking their picture and half photographing streets in Providence. And I realized that I was garbage at it. I was standing there and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, like at all, to the point I had to go back to the client and it was like, we have to rewrite the contract and I will help you find someone else to do this part because I cannot do this. I have no idea what I'm doing. So I would say landscape photography probably isn't my thing. Architecture, if people really aren't involved, I kind of don't know what I'm doing. Also, I would say though, the only exception to that is food. I low-key want to be a food photographer, give it all up and just photograph food, but that's for a different lifetime for me.
You mentioned costs, specifically with boudoir photography. Could you go into just what are the costs of a photographer in general, besides just this like equipment? There is the equipment cost, and I'd like for you to break that down, but maybe costs that people don't think about when photography comes to their mind that you have to encounter.
Absolutely. The costs are so great for a photographer. Like I'm carrying around at least $10,000 worth of equipment in my backpack. That's not including a laptop that's left at home. And then when you hear someone complain like, oh, it costs $500 or $1,000 for a photo shoot, it's like, I have to pay back all of the costs of equipment, of time, of education. And that's just me photographing on the streets. There's photographers that have to rent a studio. They have to buy lighting equipment, and lighting equipment isn't just a flash that you put on your camera. It's strobes, and the strobe is like the strobe itself. Then you have to buy the light box that goes on the strobe. Then you have to buy the C stands and the other stands that you put the lights on. Then you have to buy backdrops. Then you have to buy the stand for the backdrop. Then you have to buy weights to hold the backdrop down so it doesn't fall over. You have to buy numerous lenses, numerous filters, so much equipment, external hard drives, cloud storage, editing software. There's so much that goes into literally something that someone throws up on Instagram and then forgets about it. There's so much work that goes into, and so much time and energy and money that goes into taking pictures that is completely unseen, because we want it to be like an effortless process for the person. They have enough to worry about. They're thinking about themselves when they're getting their photo taken. They don't need to worry about the $50,000 worth of equipment that's surrounding them. Like if they're in a studio, they need to like worry about themselves and be able to show up as their best selves. Like they don't need to think about all the costs that like we're going through and all the effort that we're going through to make sure that we can execute a fantastic photo shoot.
Prestige does not always mean money, and money does not always mean prestige. Brittanny was making more money shooting bloggers and influencers versus professional models associated with well-known fashion houses. It's up to you to figure out if you want the cash, the prestige, or a mixture of both. And also to have enough self-awareness to know where your strengths lie. Knowing all of this will give you insight into your decision-making, and how those decisions can achieve creative and financial growth. One thing I want to touch upon is specifically, you had mentioned that, hey, at any given time in your bag, you've got thousands of dollars worth of equipment, right? Now with technology, everyone's got a phone that can take a decent quality picture, if not a great quality picture if they know what they're doing and they have the right app. You know, you have that power now in your pocket, and it's accessible to everyone. What has technology done in that sense, and also in the sense that it's very easy for somebody to just right click and copy paste a photo and put it into their own content, or save a photo and add it to their own thing, and relatively a lot harder for maybe the photographer to go, hey, it's the photo I took, I got no credit, what the hell, like you need to be paying me. So on both sides of that fence, everyone's got access to technology to take, a decent photo, if not a great photo. Also, everybody has access to photos that get posted, and it's very easy to take whatever's posted and put it into your own content or make it look like your own content.
Mm-hmm.
How have those two leaps in technology changed the perception, the public perception, the general public's perception of photographers?
I still think that people see the value in photographers. I will say, at least for me, especially when it comes to branding photography, even though people have the great camera on their phone, it doesn't really mean that they still want to take the photos. One of my former business partners and I, we had a workshop called the Insta Edit, where we taught small business owners how to take great pictures on their phones. And we taught them how to do flat lays and how to market themselves and take their own pictures from their phones. I do think that it's very empowering that people do have access to great technology and that they are quite capable of taking beautiful photos on their own. There's always someone that's like, I can't take pictures. And it's like, well, you probably can. You just probably need to pay a little bit more attention, have a little bit more intention about what you're doing, instead of like taking the phone out of your pocket, it's greasy, has oil on it, and then you kind of wobbly and take a photo and you're like, okay, it's done. It's like, well, if you try a little harder, you probably could take a great photo. But I still think that even though we all have access to it, that still people want a professional to do it. When I have a client or someone that's like, well, I could just do this on my phone. Rather, it's typically not clients, it's someone reaching out to me who wants photos. Then I give them a price. And then they're like, well, I could just do this on my phone. It's like, well, okay, go then.
Yeah, it's like, well, then why did you reach out to me? Like, did you think I was going to do this for free?
It's my favorite. It's like, well, someone else will do it for cheaper. It's like, okay, well, go see them. It's like, you like my photos, but you like their price. Choose which one you want more. But I want people to be more creative. I would love to even feel more creative. As a photographer, I'm still like, I wish I could feel like more creative. Of course, this last year kind of sucked the creativity and joy out of most humans. But I want people to play around and take pictures. This past summer, I taught a workshop for teens in Warren about how to take great photos with their phone. I love all the technology that's available for people, like literally in their pocket. I think it's amazing. But I'm not too worried that I'm going to be out of a job because everyone has access to a good camera. Even beforehand, before I was a photographer, I worked at a camera store and I watched people come in, drop thousands of dollars on cameras and literally say, I'm a photographer now. And I'm like, yeah, sure. If that makes you feel good, sure.
All I could think of is Gene Belcher from Bob's Burger. This is me now. like just flat square. This is me now.
That's exactly what it was like. And it's like, sure, if that makes you feel good, like just because you have the access doesn't mean you're going to be good at it. There's people who spend thousands and thousands of dollars on equipment and call themselves photographers. And it's like, that doesn't mean that you're good. Good is relative. That's fine. I'm sure there's people out there that are like, I hate Brittanny's photos. I'm like, that's cool. That works. If that works for you, that's totally fine. But just because you have access to stuff doesn't mean that you're a photographer.
Not to steer away, because I want to get the flip side of everybody having access to images and how that affects you as well. But since we're on this, it really leads into a question I have. In your opinion, what separates an amateur from a professional? Since we just talked about the I spend thousands of dollars, this is me now type of photographer that is out there. What, in your opinion, what is that separation? Is there a separation, or is it more? It varies. It's a moving target.
I do have feelings on this, and I'm going to preface with these are my feelings, no one else's feelings. But anytime someone says that they're a professional anything, I feel like you're an amateur. It's like, why do you have to preface that you're a professional? And I know they mean well, like with friends, like do like roundups of like favorite people. Like she's a professional photographer. It's like, oh, you make me sound like I just bought a camera and I'm like really excited about it.
So if somebody said they're a photography ninja, would that sound better?
You know what? I'd rather hear that. I'm like, ooh.
There you go. Pro tip, everybody. Instead of putting professional photographer on your business card, put photography ninja. Yeah. So much more intriguing.
I would look at your website. I would take a look after that. Yeah, it's like if you have to preface, like no one's like, I'm a professional lawyer or I'm a professional retail worker. It's like, no, you just do it. You just do it, and that's fine. So if you want to be a professional, drop the professional. Set that aside.
Or add ninja.
Add ninja.
Creative Capital Show, given the cheat codes in life here.
Just be ninja. No matter what you do, just be a ninja.
Thing plus ninja equals you're good at it.
I'm a yoga ninja as well. You know, lawyer ninja.
There you go.
Sales associate ninja.
Just put all those things on a business card. That's
one card though.
That's black ink on a black card to go with the ninja theme. I don't know how the hell you would read that, but
ninjas could read it. Oh no.
There you go. Like it's got, you have to be a ninja. Anyway,
let's just talk about ninjas.
That's interesting though that this is now turned to the Creative Capital Ninja podcast. Teenage Mutant Ninja Photographers. That's interesting though that the minute you hear professional, you're like, nope.
Yeah.
It's almost like that. Whenever I've gone out to like a bar or a nightclub. Anybody remember those? I remember.
Yeah.
And like I see somebody really loud and showing off money. I just sit there and go, I'm like, oh, that guy or girl or them probably don't have any money. They are making a show of how much they are spending. Yeah, or like that is their entire like spending money after bills, and they're gonna be borrowing money. Like, you know, it's Saturday. Come Monday, they're gonna be broke.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that the minute you hear professional, you're like, nope,
no. That like it's a wrap for me. It's a wrap for me on that. Yeah, I don't know, and that's why like this is very much my opinion. Other people may disagree, but for me,
I think it's an interesting one. That's why I just want to. I'm asking more about it.
Yeah,
because I was like, oh, that's interesting. All right.
Yeah, I think it's a confidence thing. I feel like not a confidence in yourself when you feel really. It's interesting for me because with photography, it was like the one thing in my life that I didn't question. Like I was like, oh, I took these pictures, I put them on the internet, and I didn't feel self-conscious. I questioned so many other aspects of my life, but that was like the first thing where I was like, oh no, this is it. This is it. This is my work. This is it. And I don't really know where the moment clicked over for me, where I was like, I'm a professional now. I assume it's when money showed up. That's when people consider themselves professional, but then it leads into a whole topic about capitalism, and money is the only reason. Once you get enough money, then you're a real person at something. Like I would like to set that aside, because I think that there's people who have spent decades photographing birds and are not making a dime off of it, but they've worked on their craft for so long. Like I would consider them a professional at what they do, even though they've made no money off of it. So I think setting the whole monetary aspect aside, even though money's obviously important, we have to pay these bills. I think it's the amount of effort that you put into something and the passion behind it and the work towards it. Like that is what qualifies a professional to me.
Access to photographic works is a lot easier now because the internet and because social media and because everybody posts everything. How has that affected your work as a photographer, that anybody can just, and hopefully this has not happened to you, and if it has, I would like to hear the story behind it Because I hear these stories of other times of not just even smaller companies, but like big companies, like large corporations taking a photographer's work that they didn't ask for, that they didn't pay rights to, and then they get taken to court, and then they're just like, yeah, we're not going to pay it. We're just going to no. How has that affected you? And larger question, so that's the micro. The macro question too is how has social media affected your work as a photographer? But if we can go into just the access of somebody can just download any picture. How has that affected you positively and negatively? And then also has social media affected you positively or negatively as a photographer?
Oh yeah, I've dealt with plenty of times that a brand has taken one of my photos, and I haven't had to worry about us regular folks, someone just stealing one of my photos and claiming it as their own. Like that hasn't really been an issue. And thankfully, even though I haven't used a watermark in a very long time, people know my work. Like they can tell if it's one of my photos. So if they see one somewhere, you know how many times I've heard from someone, I saw one of your photos on Tinder because someone used one of my photos and I've taken to them for their Tinder. And I was like, I'm so glad that you could pick out one of my photos from just scrolling on Tinder. I love
It's a hell of a signature style right there. Like
I love it.
You got a style to the point where somebody could just be like, yep, that's a Brittanny. That's right, I know who did that one.
That's like put that on the testimonials. That's the kind of stuff that I love to hear. But there are times that big brands have taken my photos. So the first one that comes to mind is that original girl I was talking about, Shira. She was like, oh my God, TJ Maxx took my photo. And I was in her living room at the time. I'd come over and it's a photo that I took that it looked like they screenshot, put a filter on it, screenshot it again, and they wrote hashtag Maxinista on it. And I was like, first off, who is running their account? Because this is garbage looking. Second, that's my photo. It's not your photo. Sure, I own that photo. You don't own that photo. So that turned into a big hassle of everyone commenting on the photo. Like, first off, this is stolen. You did not ask for this. And demanding compensation of some sort. Compensation ends up being a $50 gift card to TJ Maxx. It's like, okay, cool, thanks. So yeah, that could be frustrating because brands do feel like they have access to your photos. Like if you tag a brand, sometimes it is in hopes that they repost it, but even still, it's with proper credit. This is also before you could edit your captions on Instagram. So another blogger that I mentioned before, Rachel, Wild Fox Couture, shared one of the photos I took of her wearing one of the sweaters. And it was really exciting because that was a brand I really wanted to work with at the time. So it was like fantastic to see that my photo was on their feed, but it was just like, you credited Rachel, but not me, even though my name was very clearly tagged in the original caption. So of course, my friends commenting again. And of course, they came back with a comment that said photo by @Brittanny, but no one's going to see that in a sea of comments. So that was like, kind of like, okay, this is getting to be a little frustrating because there is a point where brands don't really know or making the efforts to credit properly. And to them, crediting is, oh, this is the person in the photos. That's who I'm going to credit, not the photographer, even if the photographer is credited in the original caption. So that part, it gets very frustrating because it's like, you were so close. I was there, we were there, and you still didn't credit me properly. That part is frustrating. But then also, a lot of the publications I've been in is because I photographed someone semi-popular, fairly famous, and then they end up using my photos in articles about them. And I'm like, oh, that's really exciting. I had no idea this was going to happen. So there is a point of, am I reaching out now to ask for compensation? Don't even know what that's supposed to look like. Or if they're going to be like, you know what, screw you, I'm going to use a different photo instead. So it's like, you just kind of sit there and you're like, this is nice. this is nice. I'm very happy that my photo was chosen, but yeah, it can be a little tricky. Like when you're more worried about brands stealing your work than regular people doing it.
Have you ever had to like think about taking legal action? And if so, did you go through with it? Did you not go through with it? What were the factors?
There was one magazine in Africa that took basically all the photos I took of Erica Hart, who is a sex educator, and she's pretty big on Instagram. And they did like a spread about her and like a article about her. And I was like, this is really nice. You could have asked. Like I understand I'm credited, but it doesn't mean it was very like even that like it was probably very indie. It was nothing big. But another photographer commented on it, my Facebook post about it, and they were like, did they pay you? And I was like, we're gonna have this conversation in DMs right now. We're not doing this publicly. But I was like, no, I have no idea this was gonna happen. And I pursued absolutely nothing about it. I did not contact him. I've done nothing. I've never pursued legal action for anybody. This is not me condoning the behavior at all, but I was just like, it's not worth it at all for me to pursue legal action for the amount of compensation I'm going to get back is not going to match up to the time, effort, and money to pursue legal action with them. Like it's not worth it in the least. So I just let it go.
You think that's a factor in maybe why brands feel that they can do that? Mm-hmm. It's just like, well, if they try to take us to court, they won't. We have more money, more lawyers, bigger war chest. They don't. So we're going to do it. We'll do it and then we'll ask for forgiveness later. And by asking for forgiveness, we'll be like, well, here's your credit. Like, you should just be so happy that you're associated with this, our prestigious ... whatever happens to be business, company, house, fashion house, etc. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's like a major factor in thinking that why that happens? Like, well, we can do it because what are they going to do to us?
Yeah,
they being the photographer that they stole from.
I definitely think so. And I do appreciate that some brands, especially when sharing content online, that they're going about it in the right way with something like they'll leave a comment on the original post and like, hey, we really want to share this. Comment back with hashtag whatever, like, or basically an agreement for the share. So you have to sign off on it, even if it is, I don't think a comment in the Instagram comments is really a binding contract, but at least you're agreeing to, yes, you can share my work. But yeah, I still think there are going to be some brands that just don't care. And honestly, we have to think that it's probably an intern that is underpaid, overworked, and it just needs to put something on Instagram. And they're just like scouring for content and just sharing whatever. So I don't think whoever like CEO of TJ Maxx, of TJX companies is like, and we're going to use this photo and we're going to put this hashtag on it. That's not really what's happening. But I do think
you just ruined the wonderful scenario in my brain of like that. Like there's an evil corporation. There's just like a doctor you will take behind a desk like we're gonna steal this. It's like
exactly.
But no, it probably is somebody in a department where they're just like, we need these things by tomorrow, and it's like, do I hire a photographer? No, you get no budget. They're like, figure it out or you're fired. And it's like, well, all right.
It sucks. It's a crappy part of it, but it kind of comes along with it. I don't think that people should put up with it. There are amazing photographers online that are doing such great education about contracts and what you should do when such a thing happens, like Lydia Hudgens and Denise Myrick. They are fantastic, and they are really known for like educating so many other people on what are the do's and don'ts here, from working with big brands to working with influencers, working with other business owners, knowing that your own rights as a photographer. And like, there's still so much more for me to learn, because I probably, looking back now, like, I probably could have said a little something about those things, but I'm going to just take that as a learning moment and move on from that.
The progress of technology will never stop, and trying to fight technology and the changes it brings to your industry will be a losing battle. Brittanny realized that a person with a high-end camera is not a photographer, as talent and skill are still required. And for the potential clients that solely focus on price, it's simple. You could choose not to work with them. Technology has also made access and distribution of photographic works easier than ever, which can be a double-edged sword, especially when credit is not properly given. It's up to you on how you will use technology to your advantage in the creation and distribution of your work. How did you learn or get your skills as a photographer? Was there any formal education involved? Was it just self-taught and getting your at-bats, so to speak? And do you think formal education in photography is a necessity or a nice to have rather than a need to have? What are your thoughts on that? And how did you become educated in the world of photography?
Me becoming a photographer was a total mistake and was not meant to happen in any fashion. I fell into it, honestly. Looking back at my life, the signs were always there that I was going to be a photographer. So I went to Rhode Island College for film studies, and my plan was to be a sports documentary film editor. That was my goal. I wanted to do sports. Going into fashion afterwards, that's a little bit of a turn, took a little bit of a left there, but after I graduated from college, I did what people did, and I got a retail job, and I worked for Sony when Sony had stores, and I was the camera girl. The manager was like, well, film, cameras, that makes sense, right? I was like, I think actually I would probably be better in TVs. If I was put in the TV department, I probably would not be a photographer today. Let's just put it that way. This was when Sony bought Konica Minolta. So they were coming out with their first SLR camera, and someone needed to learn how to use the camera. That was me. That's how I learned how to use the cameras, because I had to sell them to customers.
For someone who knows nothing about cameras, could you explain what SLR is?
Yeah, SLR is a single lens reflex camera. So DSLR is a digital single lens reflex. So basically when you have to take the lens on and off of a camera. So we have our little tiny point and shoots, and then you have the big cameras that people walk around with. That's what I do. I walk around with a giant camera with a giant lens. So that's how I learned how to take pictures. Then I worked for a local camera store for 9 months, and then I got laid off from that store. Someone was like, you should take pictures. And I was like, that sounds stupid. So I did that. And it stuck from there. Looking back at my older photos, I'm really grateful for the naive confidence I had, because the photos were horrible, but I really thought I was doing something. Like, the bones were there. I really thought I was like killing it, but I was like, these are the worst photos with the worst Photoshop actions dropped on top of it. No any other editing. Like, they were just messy, but it gave me the confidence to keep going. But beyond that, like, looking back on my life, my mother would tell me that when I was 3, I would walk around with a cassette tape to my face because that was my camera. And I was always taking pictures with my camera. My mother went to RISD for fashion. So when I was a baby, she would have fashion shows, and like I would be there during the fashion shows and during photo shoots. So I was always around it. And even as a kid, I would love watching shows about models and everything. So it was always there, but it wasn't really like, oh, this is something that I can do, until I started doing it.
Do you think a formal education is good or a necessity, or more of a nice to have in terms of becoming a photographer?
I don't think a formal education in photography is needed at all. It is nice to have, sure. If you like, I went to a great art school for photography, I'm sure that's fantastic, but I don't think it's necessary at all, because I had no formal training at all. And literally, I was probably more technical about it. I was like, when you do this combinations of numbers on the camera, this is what happens to the picture. Then learning about lighting and angles and this and that thing, like that came along with time. But I think that you don't need any formal education whatsoever to be a photographer. You should be learning. You should always be learning and always trying new things and trying to get better at your craft. But there's so many other ways of doing that. There are so many great photographers on YouTube teaching you so much great education for free. There's Creative Live. I remember when Chase Jarvis started Creative Live, and the very first one was with a photographer named Zach Arias, and he taught how to do light a photo shoot with just one light. And I was like, I learned so much just from that because I shoot with natural light. There's always opportunities to be learning more techniques and also learning new ways of editing. But I learned how to edit taking books out of the library about Photoshop. Like that's how I learned how to edit because this was still like pre-YouTube. So if you want to take a class for fun, totally do that. But don't think that like I gotta go back to school now and get a degree. Like you really don't have to. Yeah, just play around with it. Try out different types of photography. See what you really like doing and not just what you think you'll make money off of. A lot of people go into certain careers like wedding photography for the money, and that's only going to last for so long. So really find the type of photography that you love to do and stick with that and learn more about that.
So I think it's interesting you mentioned that you got a start by working in the camera department for in a Sony retail store. Is there I guess, more of a corporate path versus individual artistic path when it comes to photography? Because I know that there are some corporations, even some small businesses that have like an in-house videographer or an in-house photographer. Is there a split like that where you can be like a corporate photographer for company X, or and that may or may not pay a salary and benefits, etc., or you can go more of the, maybe not individual, I guess more of the artistic route, quote unquote? If that exists, what are those two paths like, and what's the pros and cons of each?
I think it kind of goes down to knowing what you're good at doing. As much as I look at fine art photography and like high fashion, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I could do that. I don't think that I'm good at that. Or at least right now, like I need more practice or spending more time doing that. But I really do think I'm good at what I'm doing now. I'm really good at showcasing business owners. So say if there was a company where you, for some reason, you're like constantly just taking pictures of like incoming staff or whatever, like that would be a good route to go if you did want to have a more stable job. There are more stable jobs available for photographers for in-house companies. Like I know Hasbro has a photographer. A lot of the big companies have in-house photographers. It just depends on really the route that you want to go. I know I still get Indeed, even though I swear I've unsubscribed from Indeed emails about job listings. They keep coming to me. So I know people are still looking for in-house photographers. It just really depends on the type of photography that you think you're good at and will get enjoyment from. Some people like food photographers for basically all the food that you buy. There's a photographer in-house shooting all that stuff that's on the packages. So it kind of just depends on what route you want to go. And you knowing that you could probably do both, like you can be an in-house photographer somewhere and still shoot what you want on the side. I think it is really knowing what brands you want to work for and what like really brings you joy. Like if I really want to work for Nike, like I love Nike. I want to take Nike photos, like trying to get in the door that way. And that could also look like shooting a lot of Nike product on your own and posting it to your feed and tagging the crap out of them so they see it. There's definitely ways of getting your foot in the door, but I think it really depends on what you're looking to do.
I want to ask about two specific moments. One being, what was the moment that made you go, yeah, like photography is my thing, this is my jam? And then the other moment, when did you realize, oh, this is a business?
It's interesting for me because I'm trying to find a moment of like, was photography ever a passion for me? It was something I really, really enjoyed doing, and I love doing it. But I was kind of like, usually people start off like, this is my hobby, and then I do it. But I really feel like, kind of like from the beginning, I was like, okay, so I'm a photographer now. I'm just gonna go do this because I was unemployed and I had nothing else to do. And me being me, even I guess way back then, I was still like, I need to have a job. Like I need to be doing something, and I just created myself a job. This is my job now. This is what I do. Doesn't mean money was coming in, but to me, that was my job. I recently did a panel for the state of Rhode Island about passion to profit, and they put me on like this panel, and I was kind of like, I'm gonna sound horrible. I'm like, not like photography was never my passion, but it just like I kind of don't remember a moment where it was just like, this isn't work to me. And you can still love your work and enjoy your work, but I was just like, it always feels like a job to me. So like, this is just my career. This is just what I do. But like when I really truly became like, oh, no, Brittany, this is your business now, is when I was like, no one else will hire me. I was still applying to jobs. I was still like, I still gotta pay these bills. So I was like still applying to work at places, and I was not getting any interviews. And I was like, oh, so no, this is like legit. This is my job now because no one else is hiring me. So now this is what I'm going to do. And now I have thousands of bosses instead of one boss. Everyone's my boss now.
I think that's interesting, but I think it's also good from a story perspective. This may help somebody out there that it wasn't, I knew from age ... that I wanted to be a photographer. It was more of, it seems like almost like an osmosis, because you had said that there was early signs and you were around it a lot, but it wasn't like you were at a fashion shoot or something like that and you were just like awestruck. It was just, you were around it. It happened to be around you, and more from like a serendipity osmosis kind of thing.
Yeah.
It happened, which I think we need to tell people sometimes, like, that's okay. Like you don't, like you could be good at something and make money from it, and you're not this like imposter syndrome thing going on of like, you didn't pursue it from like, age 5 and now you're there. And if you do that way, that's fine too. But it just that like you weren't like this, it wasn't this super passionate from the get-go. Like you can sometimes just fall into stuff, and sometimes life and karma just bring stuff to your doorstep and you roll with it.
100%. And I think that's the thing, like people romanticize certain careers. And I definitely think people romanticize being a photographer. And I'm like, dude, I sit at my computer all the time. I didn't pick up my camera for 2 months. And probably the last time I picked up my camera was to take pictures of me, my boyfriend, and my dogs. Like, it's not as romantic and glamorous as it seems. That I know I definitely added to it, at least for myself, because at one point I started to go to the New York Fashion Weeks, and I'm like posting all this stuff, and I'm at parties and I'm like seeing people, and I'm like, well, look at me, I'm glamorous. And I'm just like, okay, I'm going to take the bus back to Rhode Island now. I'm not putting that part on the internet. Like, yeah, it's definitely not as glamorous and exciting as people would love it, like think of it to be.
What aspects of photography that people don't see? Like beyond the task of, I have the camera, I am now shooting the thing, the subject, the person, the food, the setting, the whatever. There's probably a lot more beyond that. I'm assuming. I think that's a safe assumption to make. What is beyond that, like before and after? Like what is the work that goes into that?
So if we're gonna say like even like when the job is already booked, like there's still, depending on it, the planning aspect. Like planning is, that's why I really love just photographing people, and like, let's just run around the streets and see what works out. If there's a background that's cool, like let's do that. I think I really thrive with that. But a lot of the time there is a lot of planning, especially if multiple people are involved or it's a much bigger client. Then we have to get like a stylist, set design. Sometimes we gotta get food. Sometimes we just gotta get a lot of hair, makeup. There's so many more people involved on a shoot, just so the client can show up and have their shoot. Like we don't necessarily want to, at least for me, for them. They don't need to see the planning aspects. They just need to know that it's being taken care of for them. Also, finding inspiration, and this kind of actually will lead into like a question from before about how does social media affect me. It's like, oh, then you start looking at other people's photos and you're like, no, they're better at this. So then you start questioning yourself. Then you got to stop questioning yourself because you still have a job to do. So then you got to go and handle your job. And then it's like, oh, got to edit the photos, because I'm an overshooter and I'll shoot 800 photos in 45 minutes for no reason at all. Like now I have to go through every photo, pick the best photos, edit the best photos, send them the photos, make sure they got it, make sure they know how to download from Dropbox, because that's really hard to do apparently. There's like so much that goes on just for someone to just have their pictures.
When it comes to the business side of things, are you more of a general contractor, or did you like form a company? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I'm a sole proprietor, like general contract. Yeah, I have not done an LLC. I did a partnership for my other business. But yeah, it's just me. I have.
What's that other business,
It's
by the way?
called
Not
the
to
Branding
sidetrack.
Edit. We actually shut down the business last summer 2020, because as with most humans, the pandemic makes you think about where your priorities going. So we were all wanting to try out new stuff. So we decided to shut down that business. We worked with small business owners doing branding, consulting, and like, of course, me being a photographer. I was the photographer for it. And it was fantastic and loved doing it. But we're just like, what else is next? So yeah, I have seen no need for me to be an LLC as of yet. Maybe at some point I will. I don't really feel like there's a rush. My accountant hasn't told me that there's a need for it. So if he says there's no need for it, then there's no need for it.
Does that ever worry you, as far as like if it's sole proprietorship, they can take your personal property, where at least if it's the LLC, you're protected in a sense?
Right. That's absolutely true. Thankfully, knock on wood, that has not happened yet. No one's felt like suing me, so that's good. But also, if you are debating on being a sole proprietor or getting an LLC, it's just like looking at your contracts, making sure you have good contracts that will hopefully have no loopholes that people are going to try to exploit and then try to sue you. But yeah, I think it's a choice that everyone gets to go through. I think it depends on how many other people that you're working with. So if for some reason I brought other people on, I think it probably would be best for me to be an LLC. But at the moment, it's just me. And I haven't found a reason to do it just yet, but I'm not saying that.
Rarely is anyone's creative journey a straight path. Sometimes you will face unexpected twists and turns. Even the destination you sought in the beginning may change halfway through. Brittanny did not set out with the dream to be a photographer. Rather, it was exposure to photography from earlier years and a retail job that led down that path. Sometimes we are so set on a destination that we can miss great opportunities that are right in front of us. Embrace the twists, the turns, and that winding road. It may lead you to a destination that's even better than the one you are driving towards now. I've noticed that there's a number of locally based not businesses, but business organizations. One being Tuesdays Together. Hopefully I got the name right. That you're either heavily involved in, a founder of, a co-founder of, a founding member. It's not just one, it's plural. What made you want to do that? What made you want to get involved with these local business orgs? What was the driving factor behind that?
Community is a big factor for me. Maybe it's the only child in me, but I like having people around and being around people. So of course this last year was a little hard on me because I'm also an extrovert. So being involved with local organizations was always super important to me, and being involved with people who have the same values, who are like-minded, like that's so important. Because it felt like as the years go on, people are getting more and more divided and finding reasons to hate each other. And it's just like being around people who are like-minded and have similar values, even if you may not agree on everything. It's just so nice to be a part of a community larger than yourself.
What were some of the benefits of either starting or being a founding member or being in those organizations? What were some benefits, and what were maybe some benefits that you didn't even think of until after you went through that experience?
Mm-hmm. I was not founder oh, rewind. I wasn't a founding member of any of these organizations, but I really grew up with the Lady Project, and the Lady Project sunsetted in 2018, I want to say. They were around for 7 or 8 years. Lady Project was a local nonprofit that started in Providence, but ended up being cross country. So we had chapters in New York, DC, LA, Atlanta, Dallas, like we were all over. Chicago had one, I believe. And it was bringing like-minded women together. So with them, with Providence Lady Project, the Providence chapter, I started off with, of course, as the photographer and worked my way up to COO. So it was really important to being in the Lady Project has done so much for my career. I would say just as much as like working in New York did, because it really solidified me as like, okay, I'm a female business owner. I need a photographer. Let me go hit up Brittanny. Like everyone knew me as like, okay, I'm starting a thing. Let me go talk to Brittanny. And if I wasn't in that community, I don't think that I would have as much recognition as I do without them. Also, 3 years ago, I became the communications co-chair for Rhode Island Now. Now is the National Organization of Women. And I think that's mostly because of the branding. I ended up the communications co-chair, but that's a more politically minded organization, working on getting equity and equality with women, with equal pay, ending racism, LGBTQIA plus rights. It's like so much more. So it's been nice to be able to be part of a organization locally that's out to try to make this place just a little bit of a better place to live as a woman. And then recently, I became the co-leader of the Rhode Island chapter of Tuesdays Together, which is part of the Rising Tide Society. Rising Tide Society was founded a number of years ago by Natalie Frank and a few other people. They were all wedding photographers. So if you do join a Tuesdays Together chapter, you will see a lot of wedding photographers, but it's not just for photographers. And Christy, it's been around for a number of years, but Christy was running it on her own, and she reached out the end of last year because she knew that I know a lot of people in the community, and their mission is community over competition. She knows that community is such a big aspect for me, and it's so important to me. So it just made sense for me to then start co-leading with Christy.
Do you feel Providence can get, from a creative standpoint, cliquey at times, or people do get more competitive, and then that's could be a contributing factor as to why there are not more breakout, I want to say creative stars, but like more breakout creative professionals that hit that national stage or that world stage? Have you experienced that or seen that as a photographer? What's your opinion on that? What's your take on that?
Definitely, Providence can be very clicky. There are like the different sections of people, and like, okay, they will always hire the exact same person and they'll never hire anyone different. And it can be frustrating, but I will say that I don't think I've ever lost out on a job to somebody else. As in, if they were considering me and someone else and they went with someone else, like that was just not my job. And that's fine. Um, because people have an idea of what they want. And even if the idea of what they want is a cheap photo, then they're not going to get that from me. So I never have lost out on a job. So, like, when I see that people are so competitive, it's like, is it really for you then? Like, I'm sure there's opportunities I really wish I could have, but if they didn't reach out for me, there's a reason for it. Like, I'll make it work if someone really wants to work with me and it's just so there's something there, like I will make it work. But if I've never just flat out lost something to someone else. And if people have that mentality, then I need to think, I would ask them to question, why is that the thought process? Because really there is enough for everyone, of course. Like, someone's gonna need some photos at some point in time. you know so I'm not too like worried about that fact that everyone and their mother is a photographer, it seems like, in this town. I'm not too concerned about that because everyone has their own style, their own thing. And there's stuff that other people can do that I can't do. So it makes sense that they got certain jobs and I didn't. That's fine. There's stuff that I'm going to book that other people aren't going to book because they don't have my style. And that's totally fine. I feel like there's a lot of wasted energy in competition. It's already hard enough being a photographer. Why on earth am I going to add competition to it? Like, I chose a creative career. Like, that's ridiculous in itself. Why am I now going to worry about what other people are doing on top of it?
Just to go off that last line, I chose a creative career, and that's ridiculous in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned earlier that photographers do other things. Can somebody make, or is it rare, can somebody make a sustainable living, maybe not doing just one style of photography, but multiple styles of photography, or a mix of like the corporate photography being like an in-house photographer for a big company and then they're doing their own thing? Or do they have to do completely other things? Like, I've noticed on your website, you also teach yoga
Mm-hmm.
and tarot card readings,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken. Is it possible just to stay within the world of photography and make a living and have a somewhat comfortable lifestyle or a comfortable lifestyle? Or do people not realize, no, you have to do photography and these other things or this other thing?
I definitely think it's possible that you can just do photography and pay the bills and lead a comfortable life. I definitely think it is possible. It might come from different types. Because again, if you're just a wedding photographer, you absolutely can exist on just being a wedding photographer and that's it. But if you like, I really, really, really love shooting models and I live in a smaller town and it's like not really big and popping here, that we have fashion designers that want to like hire me to do all this stuff, then like, yeah, you might have to supplement with other jobs or other income. So I can't say like you can't just be a photographer or you must do other things. I think you have to do what's best for you and makes you feel secure. I am very sad that somewhere along the way, when you work for yourself, it has become like a bad thing to say of like, oh, I still have a 9 to 5, or I do whatever else, or I work retail, or I still bartend. And it's like, no, like do what you have to do to pay your bills and have absolute no shame in that. That's so important. Like, you still need to survive. And Elizabeth Gilbert said in Big Magic, I think, I can't remember which book it was, but she was still working as a server in a restaurant when like her first big book came out and did really well because she did not want to put that pressure on her art. And that's where a lot of people give up on doing what they find passion in, like photography or any other creative venture, because they put too much pressure on their art and what they love. And now it's just like a means to make money. And that's really sad because then we all just lost an artist. So I'd rather you go get yourself a part-time job or still work your 9 to 5 and make a plan or figure out, or just do something on the weekends to supplement your income. Do whatever you have to do so you feel secure and you don't have to put that pressure on being a photographer or being a musician or doing whatever you want to do. There's no shame in legally doing what you have to do to make money.
Community can help you in all sorts of positive ways. Having a community to call your own can enable you to share ideas, gain critical feedback, and provide a network of like-minded creatives to work with. And if you can't find a community, good. Now you have the opportunity to put yourself out there and start a community of your own. And once you do, you may be surprised how many people out there share your creative spirit. What's the one thing you wish the public, the general public, the non-photographers of the world knew? Not necessarily one thing. What are some things that you wish the general public knew about being a photographer?
I wish that people knew that just because as a photographer I own a camera, it doesn't mean that I can do anything. Typically, it's like I'm a boudoir photographer or I'm a branding photographer. You see, I'm not a professional photographer. I'm a boudoir photographer. I do branding. I'm a fashion photographer.
Professional is the dirty word in this conversation.
We don't say that anymore.
We say ninja now.
We say ninja. You're a ninja photographer. Just because I do this does not mean I can do that. And an example I have, thankfully, I was not there to witness this, but I used to work for the Italian consulate a number of years ago. I was their video editor, and their daughter got married. Oh no, this was in between. So I stopped working for them. I end up running into them, and they're like, "Are you still a photographer?" I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, we should have hired you." I was like, "What happened?" Their daughter got married, and they had a friend who is an architecture photographer, and he was like, "I'm going to shoot the wedding." And they were like, "Sure, yeah, you have a camera." So like everyone here in that situation was in the wrong, because they get the photos back and everyone's heads were cut off. Because he's shooting landscape, he has vision, he's seeing horizon, he's doing everything, focusing on everything but the people. So it's like, just because you're really great at this doesn't mean that you're great at that. And I think when someone's like, well, they own a camera, they can take pictures of my dog or my baby or my whatever. And it's like, I could, but I can't. And I kind of wish you would just not maybe hone in to save you some time as the general public, like, okay, I need newborn photography, and not just constantly hit up the one person that has a camera and it's like, oh, they can do it. Because then I'm like, now I'm just turning down stuff. I'm spending more energy turning down things that like make no sense for me. I've gotten weird requests along the way. I'm just like, no, I can't shoot your cousin's first birthday party. I can't do that. No.
Have you ever had to like do those kinds of gigs? Like, have you ever had to do baby photography, like in the beginning, maybe just to get some money?
In the beginning, no, but there was a point in my life that I tried to block out. Somewhere along the way, a number of years ago, I did work at both Sears and JCPenney Portrait Studio, and it was dreadful for so many reasons. It was
before you get into that, and I'm not trying to cut you off, but the reason why I asked is because there's this Rodney Dangerfield movie called Easy Money.
Okay.
I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I've heard of it.
And it co-stars Joe Pesci, which I'm like, why did that not get more promotion? Joe Pesci and Rodney Dangerfield in a movie. But one of his jobs is, actually, no, not one of his jobs. His main job in that movie, he's a baby photographer.
That's amazing.
And he smokes a lot of weed and drinks to get through the day. And I don't want to ruin the plot point for anybody who hasn't seen it, because it's like an 80s movie. It's hilarious, but there's a plot point reason of why he can't drink or smoke anymore, and now he has to he still is a baby photographer, but before he was like super easy going and he could get the kid to smile. He has this other kid, and the kid's being a brat, and he says some very not so nice words to the kid and to the parents. So as soon as you were saying like, I can't take a picture of dog or baby photography, all I could think it was Rodney Dangerfield, and how when he took away his crutch of a joint and a beer, he said what everybody thought when what everybody's thinking when watching the scene of how the kid's acting. So
That was
you've done
probably
that,
me.
and I'm guessing from
That
what you're
was
telling
me.
me, it wasn't a great experience.
No, that was me. That was literally me at like JCPenney Portrait Studio. I'm just like, what? How did I? What? Like, I was like, how did I get here? Why is this happening? I made the mistake of, not being ageist in any way, but like I'm a little older than some people. And like my manager probably was like 19 at the time. And I was showing her photos that I took um, outside from my own career. And she was like, wow, you must have a really nice camera. And I'm like, you know what? I can't be here anymore. I can't do this.
Wait, that was the line? That was the comment? Like, wow, you must have a really nice camera. That
Like a
was the
nice
line that
camera.
you're like,
That was the line.
I'm done. I'm out.
I was like, you know what? I can deal with a lot, but the camera set itself up. It took these photos on its own. It edited them on its own. The camera did a great job. Yeah. Uh-huh. I think that's the thing about photographers. Yeah, that there are like the typical gripes, like why does it cost so much? Why is this? Why is it that? But it's like it's photography is so broad because everything we're capturing everything. You can use photography for absolutely everything under the sun. So like just assuming that we can all do it and do it well and do it for the price that you want, it's like, okay, maybe niche it down a little bit, narrow it down just a little bit.
That's like another recurring theme I've noticed too is that people who are not involved in creative industries or sometimes not involved in that specific industry, you're magical, right? Like you could just make all these things happen so effortlessly, and I feel like it's a compliment, but also like no, like how do you think this actually works?
Yeah.
Like it's great that you make it look effortless, but there's effort.
Yeah. Like there's some careers where it's very specialized and like, okay, cool. But there are some careers that are, it's so broad. And then you break it down from there. It's like with a lawyer, there's lawyers that can deal with one thing. They can deal with an environmental law is not going to handle your divorce. So it's like, no, you're going to get a divorce lawyer. If you're going to a doctor, well,
I would like to see that case on Caught in Providence, though. Like, Your Honor, my client had to this divorce is justified, and my client deserves X amount of alimony due to global warming. Like whatever a lawyer can pull that off, I want to hire that guy, that person. Because
I mean, same actually. I do need a lawyer, so yeah, sure. But yeah, same thing like with a doctor. I'm like, you need brain surgery. A foot doctor is not going to handle that for you. It's just like I think when it becomes to creatives, and that's a larger issue of just like they can figure it out. It's all the same. Y'all can pull it off. Just like someone I saw, I'm in a marketing Facebook group and they're like, can you please stop lumping SEO and social media management and like all these things in one job listing? Because these are separate jobs. Just because they do something related to a camera does not mean they can do what you want them to do.
Well, we're at the end here. Anything you want to promote, whether it's your own businesses, your own stuff, some of the business organizations you work with, people you work with, go for it.
Thanks. And thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun for, is it Wednesday? It's Wednesday, a Wednesday afternoon. So yeah, you can find me at BrittannyTaylor.com, BRITTANNY. There's 2 T's and 2 N's in my name. Thanks to my mom for that one. You can find me there where I post about my photography, where you can do yoga classes with me. And if you want a tarot reading, I do a lot of things. Also, you can find me at Brittanny, BRITTANNY on Instagram and at Brittanny.Taylor also on Instagram. I have a lot of Instagram accounts. I will save us all the stress of me listing them all off, but you can find me there. Also, if you are a small business owner in Rhode Island, you can join us on Facebook in the Tuesdays Together RI Facebook group. It's a really fantastic group of humans. And if you just want to be a part of that community over competition and be seen in all the funness and all the struggle of being a small business owner, come join us there. Also, if you are looking into getting into more politically minded events, you can definitely check us out at RI Now. Now has been around for a number of years. It's a really established organization, and it's a really great group of people I work with over there as well. And yeah, maybe even catch me on Twitter at Brittanny. I typically only show up to live tweet award shows. So if that's your jam, find me on Twitter.
All right. Well, thank you, Brittanny. Brittanny Taylor, everyone. Brittanny Taylor Photography, Brittanny Taylor Yoga, Brittanny Taylor Tarot, the wonderful world that is Brittanny Taylor. Brittanny, thank you so much for coming. And that concludes this episode of the Creative Capital Show. Special thanks goes to my guest, Brittanny Taylor. Brittanny, thank you for coming on and sharing your insight with the audience. The Creative Capital Show is hosted, recorded, edited, mixed, and produced by me, Jason Sylvia. You can listen to the Creative Capital Show over at our website, creativecapitalshow.com. We're also available on Anchor FM, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and all other major podcast hosting platforms. If you like the show, please subscribe. Helps the show out a lot. And be sure to follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the show, and until next time, keep on creating.